Do you feel like you're barely keeping your head above water? That no matter how hard you try, meaningful progress remains out of reach? Heather gets that. She battled an eating disorder for years before seeking help. Now in recovery, Heather is here to tell you that positive change is possible even when it doesn't feel that way. Join her as she shares openly about her struggles and small triumphs. Fair warning though, Heather doesn't hold back. Her candid story may trigger some. But for those wanting honesty, hope, and healing, this is 1% Better with Heather. The information and stories shared on 1% Better are based on host Heather's personal experiences with eating disorders and mental health challenges. Heather is not a licensed doctor, therapist, dietitian, or other health professional. Her advice and opinions should not be taken as professional medical advice. Please consult your physician or a qualified health provider regarding any medical or health-related issues. 1% Better also contains descriptions of eating disorders that may be triggering for some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Hey there, mellow gaffers, and welcome to 1% Better with Heather. I have an amazing guest today. I have Sherry Shaban. Did I say your last name right?
Good
Yay.
word, yeah.
Yay. So welcome, Sherry. We'll just jump right into it, if you don't mind. Please introduce yourself and tell us all about you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Sherry Shaban. I am from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and I've been in the health and fitness space for almost 25 years now, which is really just revealing my age here. And I actually got into health and fitness almost by accident. And when I was growing up, I was really involved in sports. I was that tomboy competing against the boys always, trying to outrun them, out push up them, arm wrestle them. And that was really where my identity was attached to. And so I was a competitive swimmer growing up. And then by the time I was in high school, I was now in varsity sports and generally MVP for almost all sports that I participated in. I was always placing first in most of the sports and activities that I did. And then all of a sudden, when I was 16 years old, I was going downtown, Lugano, Switzerland. I was actually in boarding school at that time. And my objective was to buy Pearl Jam tickets with my roommate because Pearl Jam was in town. And, I was a grunge girl back in the time. And so we were trying to catch the bus to come back to campus. We had to check in at a certain time. And I rushed across the street. I could see that the bus was starting to take off from the station and I thought I could catch it. And I didn't see the car coming, but I was struck by a car. And so when I regained consciousness, I was actually in the hospital. I didn't really know what happened. So this whole story and this whole accident is a recollection from what my roommate had shared with me, what she witnessed. Poor girl. And so when I woke up from the accident, I just had abrasions on my face and I was a little bit sore. I felt like I was beaten up a little bit, but I went back to basketball practice a couple weeks later and I started getting back into all of our drills. And after a couple weeks of that, I started to experience a very sharp pain in my right glute. And at first I thought it was maybe muscle soreness. It had been a moment since I needed to take time off and come back to sport, but it eventually started to progress until it was going down my leg and it was getting more and more intense very, very rapidly until it got to this point where I couldn't walk uphill. I couldn't sit. Every time I would go from seated to standing, it was excruciating pain. I needed to lie down. I couldn't even stand to shower. I needed assistance. And so that's when I went back home to visit my parents. And then they brought me to see a doctor. And I discovered that I had severely damaged my spine after that accident, and I needed an emergency surgery to relieve the pain and the compression on the sciatic nerve that's in my right leg. And so by the time I hit 17, I was told by my doctor that I wasn't going to play sports again. I wasn't allowed to push my body in that way, that there was a lot of potential danger and harm in doing that, and that I had to resort to light walking on a treadmill. And should I ever become pregnant one day, then that would create a lot of risks as well for my back. And so I listened to this advice, Heather, for years. And immediately realized that I had lost my sense of identity. My whole world was completely shattered. And the way that I saw myself in my world had changed so abruptly. And so, because I needed to fit in and belong in a social environment, and since human connection is one of our needs, I found myself in a new social environment. And I was spending time with those people that parents usually tell us not to spend time with, that we should probably avoid some of those habits that they warned us about. And so that was my world for several years, up until my early 20s, where I just had this epiphany. I just woke up one day just completely so out of alignment with who I am, just so much self-loathing, so much really self-disgust, and just questioning, like, how did I get to this place? Like, I always envisioned myself as a person who's really involved in fitness and in sports. And here I am doing a lot of habits that really don't align with my values. And so it was at that point really that I decided to sign up at a local gym, even though I was reliant on pain medication to get through my day, even though I had constant chronic back pain. My whole world was revolved around my back. The amount of time I would sit in a chair, what type of car I would sit in. If I went to a social environment, I always had to ask the host if there was a place for me to lie down. And so this was my world. And I decided at that point, okay, I have to make a change. And so when I first signed up at that gym, I was actually doing my master's degree in chemistry. So I had no idea what I was doing. All I did was just copy people around me for months. So I'd walk in, I'd see somebody doing a particular exercise, I'd go lift the weights and then go try to go do the same thing. And I stayed consistent. And I did this for a few months until I realized that my back pain was almost gone. I was able to come off my pain medication. And so I purchased a treadmill, even though my doctors had told me you're only going to do some light walking on a treadmill. I purchased a treadmill and then started running 5 minutes at a time until I eventually worked myself up to being able to run a full hour. And then I started to run outside. And that was it for me. That really was the pivotal moment of my life. I dropped out of my master's degree in chemistry. I went back to school. I started all over again. I did exercise science. I became a certified athletic therapist and I became an osteopath. And then throughout this journey, also started to pick up every single course that there possibly was on different types of training modalities and, of course, nutrition. And that's where things started to get a little bit confusing. And I know we're going to have a conversation around nutrition and really just our mindset and our relationship with food. But I'll tell you, Heather, that when I first got into that space and I started to really learn more about nutrition, at first it was calorie counting. And that was what we were doing that day, that or around that time rather. And so even though my intention was not to release weight or to change my body, my intention was to learn everything there was about nutrition. I had to find the right way, the way that we're all supposed to eat. And so it started off with the calorie counting. And then after that, I heard that fats were bad and we were supposed to eat a low fat diet. And so I jumped onto that bandwagon because the science is there and I'm a scientist, right? And so after a while, I then heard that there was this guy named Atkins who was now talking about how fats are really, really good. And that, eating a lot of protein and meat is really, really good, but carbs are really, really bad. And so the science was there too. And so then I jumped on that wagon. And then all of a sudden, I joined the CrossFit world. And now we're talking about how we're supposed to be eating like a caveman. So I'm like, all right, the science is there. So I got to start eating like a caveman. And then all of a sudden, I heard about the zone diet. And so then I jumped on that because the science kept supporting every single diet. And after the zone, then there was macros. And after macros, then there was keto. And after keto, then it was the vegan diet. And now I am completely confused. And I have an incredibly disordered relationship with food because the rules that I believed in 2 weeks ago are now non-existent. And now not only that, but those rules are so contradictory. And I just felt so uncomfortable around food. And so even though by that time I had owned a gym and I was helping guide people through nutrition, I just didn't feel, again, that I was in my alignment. During the week, my meals were very clean. I would meal prep Monday to Friday, spot on, depending on, of course, the rule of that week. But then by the weekend, that's where I would find myself at a completely different grocery store where my members would never see me, buying all the foods that we're not allowed to eat, the foods that are very, very bad for us. And I'd find myself binging on that on Friday, and then again on Saturday, and then again by Sunday. And then by Monday, I had to now clean up everything. And so it became this vicious cycle of confusion, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of frustration, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And I was trapped in this place so silently. And from the outside, Heather, you could never tell what was going on. But it was the inside. It was that mental struggle, constantly feeling such anxiety around food, around what I would eat, how much I would eat, and then, of course, how I would feel after I ate.
Yeah, that hamster wheel hell. Yeah, I'm like right on there with you. And it is. And I've lived 1,000 lives. I've been a size 22. I've been like a negative 22. I grew up heavy, lost weight through a certain program, which I won't rag on because I think it was a good program in its day. Now, I don't think so. But it is so, all these diets, like it's so much. And being a mom at a school and someone's got some MLM, right? And I remember I was doing shakes. There was a big thing with shakes in the like 2010s, right?
Right.
So I was doing that and only eat one meal a day. And I was like, but this doesn't seem right. But you want to be part of the group.
Right.
So there's pressure at like just wanting to belong in your community, wanting to belong in society, wanting to look like the Instagram people.
Right.
It's a maddening thing. And the only people benefiting are all those people putting out the studies, because I'm sure there's money behind all those.
Oh, yeah.
And we're all here to spend $1 bazillion a year on whatever is supposed to help us.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then through the process, just this constant feeling of not enough, right? This constant feeling that once I now look like this, once I now have this all under control, then my life will be great. Then I'll be happy. And so it becomes this place that you're trapped in. And really, it's a self-made prison, right? And what I know too is that there is a lot of influence. So diet culture, as we're talking about right now, is very, very influential when it comes to the conversation that we're having. But we don't oftentimes view trauma as another stimulus to getting to this place. And especially women who have gone through certain types of trauma, sexual trauma being one, and consciously using food to actually create a protection mechanism between them and the person who attacked them. And of course, the side effect of that protection mechanism is the weight gain. And the weight gain then is going to have us look for a way to do something about the weight. And so there's so much control around what that can look like for us. And what's so important is that for us to really feel safe and for us to really feel relaxed, and what oftentimes we don't think about is to dissociate that feeling of restriction, because food scarcity in itself is another form of trauma, Heather. And we don't, again, look at it this way. So we know that a lot of people develop unwanted eating behaviors due to traumatic events. So this could be a coping mechanism, for example, for not wanting to feel or sit in the emotion that feels very uncomfortable for them. However, food scarcity is also incredibly traumatic. And so food scarcity, what I teach is that there's two types. There is actual real food scarcity, and then there's imposed. The actual real food scarcity is us literally growing up in an environment, for example, where there really was no food. Our parents worked so hard. Maybe mom worked 3 jobs. She was a single parent. She couldn't put food on the table. That creates traumatic feelings for us. And oftentimes the side effect of that is a scarcity mindset and a needing to binge or to fill that void that was missing when we were younger. However, imposed food scarcity, now that is through dieting. That is us imposing a particular scarcity. That is us restricting calories or an entire macronutrient, for example, or staying in a calorie deficit, or constantly focusing on what we're not allowed to eat, completely polarizing food. And so when we polarize food in that way, polarizing meaning certain foods are good, certain foods are bad, we actually give it a charge. And the charge that we give it now reflects our emotions and our value and our self-worth. So if I eat these good things that I've deemed this week or on this diet being good, then I'm good. And I feel validated, I have value, and I'm doing good, and I'm on the wagon, right? And when I'm eating the foods that don't serve me or the foods that are bad on this diet, then I feel bad. I feel guilt. I feel shame. I feel not enough. I feel like I screwed up. And now that relationship with food also becomes very black or white. That also becomes polarized in our mind, because now we've developed something called non-dialectical thinking, where if I had a small piece of cake, then all of a sudden I've screwed everything up. Now I have to eat the whole cake, because since I've already screwed it up, I may as well go all in, right? Go hard or go home.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so those are a lot of the harms that really we start to implant in the subconscious mind, and we start to operate with when we have imposed food scarcity long term.
Yeah. And the go big or go home, because I'm one of those people, because obviously there's a reason where I got to where I was. And you do something to your brain. So now you've given yourself almost binge eating disorder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now the guilt, the shame, the 7 horsemen come on down, right? And then you get like anxiety going around food and depression around food, and it's just it's so much. It's so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do we get ourselves on the other side of it and be like, no, this is not our fault. We are set up to fail for the diet industry, because that's how they're
Yes.
gazillionaires and I'm not. And how do we get in front of it and be like, no, all food's fit?
Right. Right. Oh, so good. So good. So yes, every diet will set us up to fail, because diets are so goal oriented, right? It's always focusing on, I need to release a certain amount of weight. They don't teach us how to create a system, which is a lifestyle. And so for us to really step away from that, let's say in more of a motivational or a coaching environment, what we could look at is, instead of focusing on releasing 30 pounds, if that is our goal, what we instead can focus on is becoming the person who's 30 pounds lighter. And that also takes us away from the conversation of focusing around controlling the food, because now we're actually talking about many different things in our lives. And so health in general, as I share and as I teach, is not this measurement, or it's not valued or validated by certain numerical measurements that we get from certain tests or from the scale or from the BMI chart, as an example. Health instead is our feeling, and it's dynamic. Health is felt. It's not a state, and it's not a reflection of where we are on a particular chart. And so health then becomes a balance between the relationship with our body, the relationship with others, and then the relationship with self. And then notice what I first said, it was the relationship with our body, not the state of our body, not the size of our body, not the weight of our body. It is the relationship between our body. Because what we don't oftentimes realize is that negative self-talk, is that the way that we've been treating our body has a massive impact. And so what's really behind all this, and what's behind the binge eating, is really the nervous system. And binge eating is actually a natural function that we have. We are designed to binge. It's just that we just turn on this mechanism when we give the environment and the body the opportunity to do so. We have to actually set up the circumstances for that to happen. And one of the ways that happens is through food scarcity, whether that is imposed or whether that is true food scarcity. And so when we trigger the part of the nervous system, which I call protection mode, many of us know it as sympathetic nervous state or fight or flight. The job and the one thing that this nervous system state is trying to achieve is survival. And so it'll do anything it possibly can to ensure your survival. And so one of the big functions that it does is, first and foremost, slow down your metabolism. And so if truly there is a threat to my survival, my body's going to want to conserve energy. It's going to want to make sure that no matter what happens, I'm going to be able to survive it. And he or she who has the most stored body fat is who's going to survive the longest. And so the other way also to ensure that is to turn on that binging mechanism. We are designed to be able to withstand a famine, if there is a famine, but then also to be able to feast right? Like without limitations. So this is now sort of one of those moments where we notice we can eat and eat and eat and eat without getting full. And so when we turn on that mechanism, this is a sign that we are in protection mode. And now protection mode also has certain thoughts and emotions, because when we talk about the nervous system, it's not just what's happening physiologically in the body. Yeah, okay, when we're in fight or flight or protection mode, we have high cortisol, high adrenaline. The body's preparing to fight, to flee, or to hide, maybe. However, thoughts are impacted and so are emotions. Because when we are in protection mode, we are actually focused on thoughts that are trying to predict worst case scenarios. We're always trying to predict something terrible that might happen because we're always trying to prepare for it. That's why we're always focused on worst case scenarios. If you're able to guess or maybe predict a worst case scenario and then to prepare for it, you have a higher chance of survival. And so as we're thinking about these thoughts, which by the way are projected in the future or maybe in the past, I know you mentioned Heather, depression, having depression around food. Generally, thoughts that are projected in the future bring up feelings of anxiety, of doubt, of fear, of worry. Whereas thoughts that are projected in the past are going to bring up feelings of sadness, remorse, loss, regret, shame. And so when we are in protection mode, our thoughts are impacted, but so are our emotions. And then we talk about emotional eating. And so the more you're trapped in this cycle, food really being the means for me to feel okay about myself, and then me being disappointed in my behavior, bringing up more of those emotions from protection mode, just continue to fuel the cycle. And so the way out of it is first to understand that thought, every single thought creates chemistry in the body. That whatever thought that we have has a direct response in the body. When we think positive thoughts, you notice that the body changes. When we are immersed in very, very negative thoughts, thoughts of worst case scenarios, thoughts that make us worry, make us fearful, notice that the body feels heavy. It feels sluggish. Again, it's slowing the processes down. You're in protection mode. And when you're in protection mode, you're going to turn on that instinct to binge, which again is a natural process to us. And even though we don't like it, and maybe this is something that we struggle with, I want to share with you that your body is so lovingly doing this for you. It's just trying to ensure your survival. It doesn't know that society is putting pressure on us because we're needing to release weight or be a size 0. It doesn't know that. It just feels unsafe. There's something off and it can't find that comfort. And so one of the things that we always talk about is how do we switch then, Sherry, from these negative thoughts to positive thoughts? Well, here's the thing. We can't just stop negative thoughts. We can't do that, right? Have you ever tried? There's too much resistance. You just notice that you actually create more of them. And so I like to use the analogy of a clean, weed-free lawn. And I did this little experiment some years ago. We got this little weed puller, right? And in Montreal, by the way, in the summer, my goodness, the weeds on the lawn are insane. And so this one day I spent, I don't know, maybe an hour plucking weeds out of my garden. And then the next day I show up and of course there's just as many as I had plucked the day before. And so that's sort of a good metaphor to think about how can we replace then these negative thoughts if we want to maybe use the analogy of weeds. And so what I learned is if you really want to remove all the weeds from your lawn instead of plucking one out at a time, you actually have to plant in more grass seeds. And so that's also the way that we start to shift our mindset. If I want to maybe shift all the negative thoughts, maybe my self-deprecating thoughts, the way that I actually speak to myself, what I'll do instead of trying to block them or resist them is I'm going to start to implant the positive ones. I'm actually going to make an intentional habit to speak kinder to myself, to have a daily practice of positive self-talk. And then over time, that negative self-talk gets weeded out.
I remember I was watching the Dr. Phil show of everything. It was early 2000s. I had nothing going on. But he said, and it stayed with me, and it was like over 24 years ago, I remember watching this, was for every one bad thought you have about yourself, and you can believe bad thoughts. They're very easy to believe. You have to plant 1,000. It takes 1,000 to undo that one negative. And I was like, wow, right? And I was like, well, that sort of makes sense to me. Whether or not it's true or not, but it's easy to believe the bad in ourselves. It's
Yes.
easy to be like, oh, here I go again. I messed that up, or I dropped the dishes, or I forgot to pick up my kid's soccer cleats. I'm a horrible mom. And you go down that rabbit hole. It's very hard to, I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking from experience. Like, I can throw myself down the rabbit hole pretty quick, then be
Right.
like, hey, Heather, good job.
Right. Right. Yeah. So good. And we're all wired this way, right? Because we are wired again for survival. And that's why we were always going to look out for what is negative, what's wrong, what do we need to fix, what do we need to pay attention to. And so that's why we're always really focused on the negative, is to prepare ourselves for what could potentially be dangerous to us. But what's interesting about the conversation, Heather, and what you just shared is I'm not certain that just for one negative thought that 1,000 positive thoughts will erase that. But what I do feel instead is that consistency is going to really help you manage your mindset and what your baseline mindset is in any case. Because I can have one negative thought one day and then decide that day that I'm going to give myself 1,000 positive thoughts, but then I don't do it again for about a month, right? Because if we really want to see transformation, if we really want to see result, it's going to be consistency, because consistency is what drives results. And so one of the first things maybe to start is just create awareness around how we speak to ourselves. And this is the one that always gets me, because I've worked with thousands and thousands of women. And it's so insane how many of us are so wired to speak to ourselves in the same way, calling ourselves the F word, which by the way is the FAT word. I say the other word, no problem, but this is the one
Yeah.
word that we don't say at home. I don't say it. I have two girls. They're both teenagers. We've never said that word. We don't call the dog that. We don't call a piece of paper that. We don't call anything that. That's a one word that we don't say. They can say the other F word, but not this one.
Yeah.
And so that's really important. Just notice, what is my negative self-talk? Because if I can acknowledge that if somebody spoke to me that way, I would get ready to attack them, right? If somebody called me all these names, I'd be like, hey, bring it on. What are you calling me? Right?
Yeah.
But imagine we're doing that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we speak to ourselves that way, we trigger protection mode, because we are being attacked. It's just that it's a self-attack. And we think that it's okay to speak to ourselves that way. And the one thing that I want to share, if anyone's listening to this and resonating with it, is what good has it brought you? If you engage in constant negative self-talk, what has it done for you so far? Has it helped you get that job? Has it helped you get that guy? Has it helped you make you feel good about yourself? Has it helped you motivate yourself? Because when we speak to ourselves that way, it's actually very disempowering. It doesn't motivate us. It already makes us feel defeated before we even started. And so it takes just as much effort to speak to ourselves in a positive way, which, by the way, we freely give away. We do this for other people all the time. We speak to them kindly. We encourage them. We give them beautiful compliments. We give them beautiful feedback. We honor them for who they are. And yet when it comes to ourselves, we have a hard time doing that. It's like we don't give ourselves permission to really be in the full expression of who we are. And what if just for fun, what if we entertain the idea that everything that we say about ourselves is the lie, and everything else that we hear from other people about us is truth?
That would be a very nice thing. Actually, because as you're saying this, I'm like, yeah, I'm like nicer to the Tim Hortons people than I am to myself. Right. So how do we do that? Like, how do we plant the seed?
So one of the things that really helps me is having a gratitude practice. And I know this can sound corny for some of us. And maybe what we do is we can start small. And so I know many people listening may have endured or experienced a hardship in their life where they maybe have come close to losing something, or maybe even lost something really, really valuable to them. For me personally, there were moments in my life, there were two moments in my life where I was almost paralyzed. And so I honor so much, and I have so much gratitude for the fact that I get to use my body freely. Yes, I've got my limitations still. I still have some numbness in my leg. I still do experience back pain from time to time. However, I'm so grateful because I should have been in a wheelchair and I'm not. And so the more that we honor our body for what it can do for us, the more again we realize that our words create chemistry in our body. And just start there, knowing that the fact that we woke up today is a privilege. And the fact that we have eyes that can see is a privilege. And that we have a body that functions for us as a privilege. And really get into that place, because it is these little tiny things that we take for granted every single day that once they're gone, do we now notice how important they were and how lucky we were to have them. You know, Heather, I have a client that I work with, and during the pandemic, imagine, she just woke up one day completely paralyzed. And she had some neck pain that she was experiencing. She went to see a physio. And what she didn't know is that she had a herniated disc in her cervical spine. And so maybe she slept wrong. Maybe she overdid her work. Maybe she overdid particular exercises, but she woke up one morning paralyzed from the neck down. And that was her reality. So that whole first year of COVID, while everybody else was in seclusion and isolation and going through the whole COVID thing, she actually spent in a rehab center, just learning how to walk again. And so this can happen to any of us at any time. And again, this isn't to bring it into a dark conversation, but harnessing love and self-love is really just appreciating the gifts that we have. And so as I appreciate so much being here today, having this conversation with you, Heather, there's so many beautiful things that we are now actually experiencing that we can be in complete gratitude towards. And so that's the first way that we harness self-love, is just really appreciating the fact that we can swallow. I work with people who've had throat cancer, who can't swallow, who had to maybe eat out of a feeding tube. And so this is the reality of what is truth for us. And this is life, where we never are actually given that big warning sign that something like that could be lost. And so if we can start there and maybe make that a ritual before we even get out of bed, the moment that we notice that we just regain consciousness, we just open our eyes before we get out of bed, just say a few things that we're grateful for. And then be so mindful of how we are describing ourselves. What type of language are we using to describe ourselves? And how would we actually really use these words to describe other people or to speak to other people? And if the answer is no, you never speak to someone else that way, then you have to intentionally put some energy and awareness and effort around how to change that self-talk.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to your story, because I was laying in a hospital. I had 2 weeks to keep breathing, and I should be dead. I know it. I was hooked up to everything. I had no kidney function. I had like no potassium, no electrolytes, no sodium, no, like we'd be here forever if I was going to list everything what was wrong with me. And I was on a feeding tube for a month, and I remember coming home because the doctor kept saying to me, "You have a 90% chance of having a heart attack sitting here right now with me," and signing all these papers. And for the next 2 weeks, still getting ECGs daily. And they're like, "You're not out of heart attack zone yet." And I was like, oh, because I always think I'm Heather. There's nothing wrong. Like, I'm an X-Men. I'm going to keep going, man. I got some superpower. And it was when I started recovery the second time of December 2022. I really had to take a step out of myself, so to speak, and be like, I'm here for a reason. I don't know what it is, and it's not my job to know. That's above my pay grade. All I know is I'm here. I'm grateful. What is my purpose? Obviously, I need to recover, and then here we are now, right? And for me, that helped me was it's above my pay grade. It's I'm just thankful I'm here.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful, and you gave me goosebumps as you're sharing that. And I know for sure that you are here for a reason. and it's to spread this message, and it's to share these conversations with the world. Heather, so
Oh,
beautiful.
well, thank you. Not to like put it about me or anything, but like, so how do we get around? Let's bring it back up again here. So now we're around food. How do we take out the negative around everything? Because apparently everything's bad for us. I don't know what we're supposed to be doing, right? So we can have rice one day and then cauliflower the next, and then no carbs, like all that. Do we just take everything out of our brain and be like, all right, what do I like to eat? And how do we go with that?
Oh, so good. So the first thing is, I would say, to reverse engineer these beliefs that you have. And so maybe step one is, okay, I'm going to list all of the beliefs that I have about food. What is on the good list? What is on the bad list? All right. So step number one, what are my beliefs? Then step number two is, where did I learn these beliefs? Because if we're going to actually change our relationship with food and heal our relationship with food, then we also have to completely abolish these beliefs. And the only way that we can abolish a belief is really to go back to the root of, where was that belief planted? When did I first learn it? And then the second question to ask is, who told me this? So who is the source? And this also gives you a lot of reference, because is this person struggling maybe with weight, or struggling with their relationship with food? Is this person maybe justified to share this information with me? Are they nutritionists? How valid is this information that I actually got it from? Is it my parent? Is it a person who maybe just read it somewhere online? I mean, where does it come from? And then the third thing is, if we really want to abolish a belief, is, how can I contradict this belief? Where have I seen this belief in contradiction? So carbs is a great one. Since you brought that up, Heather, many of us have a belief that carbs creates dis-ease or leads to diabetes or all these other health conditions. Okay, so that's the belief that I had. Now, where did I learn this belief? Oh, it's from that ketogenic book that I read. And by the way, I keep talking about the keto diet on so many interviews, and it's not to demonize it. By the way, there is a place for it. If you have a particular medical condition, it could be useful. However, what we are talking about is restriction and dieting. Using any method to try to release weight or manipulate your physical body, that now creates a restriction. That is a diet, and that triggers protection mode. Okay. So coming back now to the belief. So where did I learn this belief? Okay. Now, what is the science behind that? Is this valid? Is this justified? And then finally, how can I contradict this belief? So are there other places in the world where people are eating a high carbohydrate diet and they don't have dis-ease? Yes, many. In fact, the majority of the world. And so that's what we have to do. If we really want to get in that place where we are completely neutral with food, then we have to release the beliefs that we have. And then do that with everything else that you have. Protein. Okay, we have to have so much protein. Why? Oh, because overnight you're going to lose all your muscle. Really? When have we ever heard this happen? When have we ever heard somebody in the Western world dying from protein deficiency or getting very ill from protein deficiency? I've never heard it. Why?
Yeah.
Because that only happens when you're actually starving. And so we have to go to places and actually see environments where people are literally starving, that have marasmus, that have serious conditions of malnutrition. And believe me, they're not just deficient in protein, they're deficient in everything else. And that would be the place to look for that. And so that's where we'd have to start. And then after that, remove all the food rules. And this is the part where there's more of a struggle for us, especially if we have been in this space for a long time. And so becoming neutral with food is really just allowing all food to be equal. Even though, yes, we know there are certain foods that serve us more and there are other foods that don't. I think we can all agree. We can all agree that real food or whole foods creates and has more nutrients that can help the body heal itself and regenerate itself than other food-like substances and refined foods and processed food. Now, if we can try to lean into that and just allow for all foods to be neutral, can we now start to pick up the cues that our body is giving us? How do we respond to certain foods? And instead of thinking about what to eat, instead of having the mind choose, can we get the body to choose? Can we get the body to choose maybe what types of vegetables it prefers. Because I can tell you, for me, Heather, broccoli does not cooperate with Sherry. It's just one
Yeah.
of those veggies that for me, we don't match. And so you have to find that alignment, because when we're following all these books, when we're following all these rules, when we have all these belief systems around food, what we're also doing is absolutely ignoring all the signals and the cues that our body is giving us. And that's why we feel anxious, because we're actually overriding those signals. Our body's trying to speak to us, but our mind is like, nope, there's this rule. And that's the anxiety, that's the conflict, and that's the feeling of being out of center, and why we're not feeling that we are in our alignment.
Yeah. And how miserable is that? Like, I know you're picking on keto or whatever, but like, I don't think you're picking on keto. I'll just say that. So I'll do it too. Like anything that says you can't have a fruit or a vegetable that comes on a tree, like literally fruits and vegetables have been around since the dinosaur age, man.
Right.
There's a reason for them. So if you're saying you can't have it, or that makes no sense in my head at all.
Right.
And the other thing is, like, how miserable you're already miserable. Now you're making yourself more miserable, saying, oh, I got to eat broccoli because this book says I got to eat broccoli or I'm going to like lose all my muscle mass or whatever. No wonder people go out and binge on like pizzas and donuts. That sucks.
Right. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And so well said, because this is exactly what happens. And again, this is without judgment. As Heather and I are talking, this is absolutely without judgment, but just notice in yourself. So I avoid potatoes because potatoes are bad. And I avoid grapes because there's too much sugar in grapes. So I'll only eat berries. But then by the end of the night, I'm binging on cookies, right? Because that's what the body's going to do. It's going to make up for any restriction that you have. Again, you just triggered protection mode.
Mm-hmm.
That was an imposed food scarcity. Your body needs those veggies, and it needs those carbohydrates, and it needs that food that's full of nutrients. Potatoes are full of potassium and vitamin C. There's a lot of amazing and important nutrients in all foods that come from nature. And so what we end up doing is, because we get so confused about this is healthy, this is not healthy, this is too many carbs, does that fit in my macros? What we end up finding ourselves doing is then overeating the foods that really are not serving us. And now we're stuck in that pattern where we're now restricting whole foods, restricting foods that are more natural for the body to respond to. And whether we like it or not, or notice or not, we're triggering that part of the nervous system protection mode that's always going to drive us for survival. And the way to ensure survival, again, is to seek out foods that will give us immediate energy source. And oftentimes when you notice, when you're binge eating, when you're emotional eating, it's very specific around what you're craving. You're not craving a salad. You're craving junk food. You're craving foods that are going to give you immediate energy. And again, that comes from that drive of protection mode that is going to ensure your survival and going to get you to try as much as possible to get as many calories to conserve energy.
Yeah. And like, it's just, again, then it's the hamster wheel hell. So let's say like, then you lose all this weight on whatever fad diet's going on. You're going to gain it back the minute you like eat something out of that little specific box, right?
Right.
Here goes the hamster wheel again, right? I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So how do we get to, so we listen to our body and really listen because whatever, like not all foods, like you said, not all foods agree with people, or people just don't like things. That's okay. But how do we bring in like a healthy form of exercise? Because I don't want to be Hulk Hogan, right? Like I used to want to be Hulk Hogan, but I don't. I'm 45. I just I can't even. Well, I'm not allowed to go to the gym anymore, but like other people are allowed to. So what would you tell them?
Yeah, so we're talking about intuitive eating right now. And intuitive eating, as we were just describing, is really listening to the cues in your body. And when you're intuitively eating, you're going to notice that on certain days you may need more food. You may eat more. And on other days, you may not need as much food because your body's really just monitoring the amount of energy it's requiring for that day. And so when we look at exercise, we can also talk about intuitive movement, which also looks very similar. And so, yes, certain exercises, just like we know with food, whole foods is going to provide more nutrients for you. And remember, the body doesn't count calories, it counts nutrients. And so there's a reason for that. And if we also look at exercise, we know that, for example, resistance training or lifting weight is going to be really great for us for bone density, especially women as we age. And so there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of value also in getting cardio exercise, which could also be walking, by the way, and also maybe yoga, where you're doing a nice mind-body connection. So every single type of training or exercise I see as a modality. So it's a vehicle to give you something that you want. Now, what's beautiful about that is when you tune into, again, the body's cues, you also allow for more flexibility and adaptability depending on where your energy levels are. And so what this means is you may have a big workout plan that day, you may have a big run plan that day, but maybe your body's actually asking you to go for a walk and do some yoga instead. And so as you tap into your body's cues, you're not forcing your body to do something that feels out of alignment, because stress also comes from exercise. Actually, a lot of exercise triggers protection mode too. So we talked about stress from our environment triggering protection mode, but exercise is also a form of stress, especially if you went against where your body was that day. So maybe it's tax season. Maybe you're an accountant and you're just overwhelmed right now with the amount of work that you have to do. You're not sleeping very much. Right now, with the amount of stress that you have, it may not be the best idea to add in some high intensity exercise. You're going to notice that if you maybe add in lower intensity exercise, maybe you go for a walk, you connect with nature, a bike ride, a swim, maybe you do yoga, maybe you do something that's energetic like Zumba or dancing or whatever it is that lights you up in particular, you're going to notice that that's actually going to bring down your nervous system. And so a way to really, again, connect with the body is first to have the intention around, remember, it's not about I need to release a certain amount of weight. I want to become the person who is. And then start to look at the habits, what those habits could look like for the person who is going to be that ideal avatar of yours. And so maybe that person wakes up a little bit earlier in the morning. Maybe they wake up at 6 a.m. Maybe they start their day with a liter of water. Maybe they start off with lemon water in the morning before they have coffee. Maybe they go for a walk, right? And so now as you start to see all these little teeny tiny things that they do in their day, those are also habits that we can start to add into our schedule and really start to stick to and stay consistent around. And then when you're in that space, again, as you're listening to your body's cues, as you're monitoring your body's energy, you can also start to intuitively move based on what is showing up for you that day. And the title of your podcast is 1% Better. And that is the goal, becoming 1% better every single day. And along those lines, your 100% is not going to be the same every single day. So sometimes my 100% looks like I could go for a run and a workout. Some days my 100% is a 5-minute workout. Or maybe it's just that I need to just do a small yoga floor or just go for a walk with my dogs. And that's my 100% for that day. And so ultimately your goal is to focus on you, to commit to you so that you do become 100% better every day. And again, it's consistency that drives results over time. And that 100% needs to be flexible and adaptable so that you can stay consistent.
The consistency and consistency's all over. It's for recovery. It's for learning. Like babies gotta learn how to walk. They're consistent, right? And I always go back to babies because you're a mom, I'm a mom, right? And they're falling down and we're laughing at them. And we think and we're like, come on, get back up. But we're so encouraging. And that's what I want people to know too. People fall. We still fall. Just there's no one there. Like being your own cheerleader is a hard thing to do. And I've really had to dig deep to be like Team Heather. But pick yourself back up, man, because it sucks sitting on the floor.
Yeah. And we all get on the floor, right? And nobody has it so perfect, whatever that even means, whatever that word perfect, right? That is so self-made. That again is another self-made prison because that's all perspective. Mm-hmm. But if you have a moment to really listen to anybody's story, you would immediately fall in love with them because we all have our shares of struggles. We're just dealt different cards. It can be in different areas of our lives, but that is life because that's also what makes the hero's journey, right? You have to have the villain. And these struggles in our life is the villain that we're supposed to face, that challenge us to become better and to become stronger. And once we overcome them, to eventually create the confidence.
And I love the domino effect of just starting small goals and yeah, hey, I did that today. That's okay. And my 100%, and I love that you said my 100%, it's not going to look the same as every day. And just know that, like, just that just takes so much, like, it takes an elephant off my chest. Yeah, okay. It's okay. I have a shirt that says, I am broken, I'm okay. And it's okay sometimes.
Mm.
We're all a little bit of broken. We're all a little bit okay. And don't look at, like the social medias, like everything's great and look at me chugging my water and I love my life and blah. And you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
So well
So
said.
we are uniquely us. So don't compare yourself to somebody else
Mm.
because you'll never get there
Yeah.
ever, because you'll never be
Right.
them.
It's a moving target. Beautiful.
Right.
So well said.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So where can we find you? I know you're in Montreal, which is like a way down the street from me here in Vancouver. Just a little walk.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Sherry Shaban Fitness is my handle. You'll find resources there. I'm also on YouTube at Sherry Shaban Fitness. And then if you're listening to this conversation and you are wanting to overcome unwanted eating behavior, binge eating, mindless eating, emotional eating, nighttime snacking, stress eating, then I have a little workbook for you that you can grab at makepeacewithfood.com. It's a place for self-reflection. You'll see that it's about 50 pages long and a lot of journaling and spaces. And so this is a great way to start your journey and to really maybe reassign some of the meanings that you have around certain food groups and your relationship with food ultimately.
Oh, I can't thank you enough, Sherry. And I do follow you on Instagram and I'm always commenting on you. So I'm just so honored to meet you. And it's thank you very much for spending your time with us.
Likewise, Heather. And like does attract like. Thank you so much for having me on. I love this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's all for this episode of 1% Better. To continue the conversation, head over to our website at www.1percentbetter.ca, where you can access more stories and resources. We'd also love it if you subscribed and left us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, friends, progress takes patience, perspective, and sometimes a little help from people who get it. So be kind to yourself and others as we work to get 1% better every day. We'll see you back here next week.